Hi and welcome to another video on how to create a game like Clash of Clans. So in this video I'm gonna create the basics to place buildings on our grid. So to start I'm just gonna go to the scripts and create a new script and I'm gonna name it building. Now let's open this building script and I'm going to add my namespace. And the first variable we're gonna define a build grid. This is the grid which our building is going to be placed upon. And then we need to create a couple of integers which indicates the amount of tiles that this building is occupying on X and Y axis. I'm just gonna name those variables rows and columns, which is the indication of our building's size. And we also need a couple of integers to indicate the position of our building on the grid. Now let's go to our UI main and create an array of buildings which are going to be our building prefabs. And here in the building I'm just gonna make serialized fields so I could be able to edit them in the inspector. Now let's go to our editor and create an example building. I'll just create an empty game object and let's name it gold mine, for example. And for this gold mine I'm going to create a quad and let's rotate this 90 degrees on X and 45 degrees on Y. And now this is our quad and we need to create a material. Let's create a blank material, name it building base, and the color of this building base, let's just select something greenish for now. I'm just gonna assign the material to my quad and this is going to be base, and I'm gonna select this base and increase the Y 0.01 just to make sure whenever we place it on the grid it doesn't go too low. For example, if I put it to 0, it might go under our ground like this, but if we give it a very small number, let's say 0.01, it just ensures that it's always above our ground. And let's not to forget to attach a building script to this gold mine, and let's say our gold mine is 3 by 3. It occupies 3 rows and 3 columns, and just for now I'm going to create a, let's say, cube to represent our building, and let's not to forget to scale the base to 3 in 3 because we need to match this number with this number. Let's just do it like this for now. Let's select the cube, I'm gonna bring it up and I'm gonna rotate it 45 degrees. And I'm just gonna say 2 by 2. So this is going to be representing a building, and as you can see, if we select this base game object here, and let's also remove the collider because we don't need it, the same thing here. And if I select this, if you remember, we created that material, the building base material. Whenever the building is on available tiles, we put the color to green, and whenever it's not available, we put it on red, and we can change the color like that. So it doesn't matter, we're gonna change the color with the code. So let's create a reference to that mesh renderer. And I'm just gonna name it base area and let's assign it in the inspector. Here we go. I'm just gonna assign this base, which is our quad, and we're gonna change the color of that depending on availability of the tiles. Now let's just create a folder for our prefabs. I'm gonna open this up and create another folder, name it buildings. And inside this buildings, I am just going to say gold mine and drag it in our prefabs. Now we have a prefab for it. I can just delete that. And let's go to our canvas, our main script, UI main. If you remember, we created a buildings prefab. I'm just gonna create a new element for our buildings and drag and drop this gold mine prefab. Let me select this gold mine prefab and let's open this. I'm just gonna create another class inside this building and I'm gonna name it level. So inside this level, we're going to create an integer called level. Of course, we could use the array index, but array index starts from 0 and that might get confusing. So I'm just going to create a level and it's going to be an integer. Let's also create a level array down here. So this is going to be holding our levels. Let me save this and go back to the editor. And to see this level array in our inspector, let's just make our level class system.serializable. And now let's go back to the editor, and as you can see, the levels appear here in our building, and I'm just gonna create one level for it. Let's say level 1, and the icon for now I'm just gonna leave it empty, but we need to assign the mesh. So let's go to our buildings prefab. I'm just gonna drag and drop it again, and this is going to be, let's say, mesh level 1. Our cube is going to be mesh level 1. This is going to be our mesh. Of course, temporarily, as you can see, we can disable it and enable it, create a bunch of other levels that is going to be visible based on the level of our building. So for now, I'm just gonna assign the mesh to level 1 and I'm going to apply the changes. Also, let's delete that. And here, as you can see, we've already assigned a building prefabs here. Now let's create another canvas panel and let's name it shop. So this is going to be parallel to our main here. This is going to be shop. Let me make it full screen and let me set these to 0. I'm just gonna create another game object inside this and let me check this out in the 2D mode. I am also going to make this full screen as well. And I'm gonna name this elements. The same thing we did for our main. This is a UI main. We need to create a script for this. Let's go and create UI shop. So let's open up this UI shop and add the namespace. So here we go, and let's also create a namespace for it, just like the namespace we created here. I'm just gonna copy it and paste it here. And instead of UI main, this is going to be UI shop. And we also need to assign the instance in the awake function. And let me copy that. Here it is, and that should do it. Now we need a reference to our elements game object, so we could disable this whenever we want and also enable it whenever we want. So this is going to be private game object. So the first time game is created, we're gonna immediately disable these elements. So we're gonna set it to false. We could also do something like this for our UI main. So let's create the elements here and let me paste it. We have an elements here and we're gonna immediately enable it in our start. So we're gonna set active to true. So our main script, UI main, is going to be enabled or activated in our awake function, and our shop is going to be deactivated until we activate it by clicking on the shop button. And also, let's make this element public so it would be accessible from other scripts. So let me make this public and that should do it. So whenever shop button is clicked, we can just simply say UI shop dot instance dot element, and we're gonna set the game object visibility status to true, and we're gonna do the same thing here. Instead, we're gonna just set the elements dot activate to false. So let's go ahead and create a UI for our shop. But before we do that, let's actually assign the elements here in the main and the same thing in the shop. Of course, we haven't added the script to the shop. Let's actually add it, and that's that. Let's go back to the main script and create a boolean. So I'm gonna say private boolean active equals to true, and I'm gonna access this publicly by saying public boolean is active, and we're gonna say get return underline active. And we also, whenever the shop button is clicked, we're gonna set this active to false. So now we need to check the value of this active in our camera controller script. So here in the camera controller, let's move down to our update. Well, let's actually go to the move started. Whenever move starts, the first thing we check, we're gonna check to see if UI main instance dot is active, and only then we're gonna start moving. So let me do that, and let's do the same thing in our zoom started. So we're gonna say if UI main dot instance dot is active, and only then you start zooming. We don't want to move and zoom on the map while we are in the shop or on any other UI element. Only and only when main UI is activated, only then we're gonna move around with the camera and do the stuff we do. So that should help. And let's go back to the UI shop and create a button here. Let me say using Unity Engine.UI. So I'm also going to define a button, and it's going to be close button. We also need to assign the event for this in our start method. We're gonna assign it in the start, let's say close button dot onclick. This is type building, no, this is type button. So we're gonna say onclick dot add listener, and we're gonna use close shop method. So now let's go to our editor and create this button. For now, I'm just gonna create a UI button, and let's drag it up here. This is just temporarily, of course. Let me align it to this corner, and instead of the text, I'm just gonna create an X-like shape, and let me increase the size, something like that. So that's just temporarily button close. And I need to create a background, so let me go and create an image. I'm gonna put it right there, and I'm gonna make it full screen. So let me see this. Yeah, let me also put these values to 0 because it's full screen. And here we go, we have a background, and on button close, let's give it a little reddish color, something like that. And also let's make the text white. Okay, that's good enough for now. Of course, we're gonna use better UI when we want to do something professional, but this is just temporarily. And here on the shop, this is the close button. I'm just gonna add it right there. So let's go, and now here, I'm just gonna disable the shop and enable the main. But to make it more generic, let's actually create a method for this here in the UI main. I'm just gonna create private, or let's actually make it public, and it's going to be set the status, and it's gonna take a boolean, and it's going to be status. So underline active is going to be our status value. So if the status is true, this is going to be true, otherwise it's going to be false. And also elements dot set active is status. And here, instead of doing that, I'm just gonna say set status to false. And let's do the same thing for our shop. Let me copy this and bring it to the shop and paste it here. Of course, the shop doesn't have an active variable, so I'm just gonna remove that. So in the close shop, we're gonna say set a status to false, and we're gonna say UI main dot instance dot set a status to true. And let's go back to the UI main, and instead of doing this, we're gonna say set status to true. Now if we go to our UI, let me play this. You'll see that we have our game. Whenever I click the shop panel gets open, and I'm gonna just close it whenever we want. This is how we open and close our shop. So that's that. Now let's create a grid for our building or shop element or anything else. Here I'm just gonna create an empty game object, and this is going to be buildings. And let me give a little color to our background. So here it is, and let's expand this like that. This is going to be our building list. So let me just put this to 0, 0, 0, 0. I'm gonna create another empty game object, and this is going to be fill this one. So let me put these values to 0, and let's create another empty game object, and I'm gonna fill this 2. So let me say 0, 0, 0, 0. So this is going to be our scroll rect. I'm gonna attach the scroll rect to this. This is going to be our viewport, and this is going to be our content. And I'm just gonna assign it. This is content, and this is going to be the viewport. And let's make this only horizontal, so I'm gonna uncheck vertical. Let's leave it for elastic for now. And here it is. We can also create scroll bars, but for now just let's not create that. We could create it later. And here on the content, I'm just gonna create an horizontal layout group and a content size feather. I'm gonna expand the height and everything, but I'm not gonna control the width. So let's create an empty game object. Let's say this is a building, an UI building actually. Okay, let me actually expand this so we could have a better view. So this is gonna be a UI building, and let's actually create a script for it. So I'm just gonna select this, drag and drop it on my game object, open this up and add my namespace to it. And that's that. So let's add the Unity Engine UI and create a button, so whenever it's clicked we will be notified and place a building on the grid. So let's create a private button. I'm just gonna name it button, and here in the start I'm gonna assign the listener. So that should do it for now. So now let's check the editor. Let's create a button inside our UI building, and let's say button, and here it is. I'm just gonna assign it to it, and I'm gonna make this button to fill the parent. Let's say 0, 0, 0, 0, and let's select the building and increase the width. Here it is. Of course we can get a little offset to our button, something like this maybe. So let's say 0.05 and 95. So that's good enough, and I'm gonna select the text. Let's bring it up here and say gold mine. Gold mine. So that's that. I'm also going to increase some font size, and here in the UI building I'm just gonna open it, and let's also create an integer, and this integer is going to indicate the index of our prefab. So let's say it's gonna be an integer, and I'm gonna say prefab index. And if you remember, here on UI main we've created an array of buildings. Let's actually make this public so we could access it from other scripts. So here on the UI building, on the start, we could access that using this index and apply the changes that we want. The first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna close the shop. So we're gonna say UI shop instance.setStatus, and we're gonna set it to false, and we're gonna enable the UI main. And now we need to send a message to the server to let the server know that we want to build this building. So let's say to do. So let's go to our player. If you remember, we've created a bunch of request IDs here. So we're gonna create another request, name it build, and let's say this is number 3. And here in the building, we're gonna say sender. But before we do that, we need to add the namespace here. So we're gonna say sender. We're gonna cast the package ID to integer, and the package ID is going to be player.requestids.build, and we're gonna send an integer indicating the building index, which is going to be our prefab index. So that should do it. Now let's go to the player. As you can see here, we have a listener, and we're listening to see if we're receiving anything back from the server. But we're gonna do that later. For now, we need to go to the server and process this request. Let's open the server project. I'm just gonna go to my server folder and open it. And here in my terminal, I'm just gonna go to receive integer. And if the packet ID is number 3, of course this is not an efficient way of using packet IDs, because we could create different IDs for different receive types, but for now let's just use this. If we receive an integer with a packet ID of 3, it means that we are requesting to build a building. So we need to check the building requirements, so how much resources this building needs, and to see if we have that resources. So to do that, let's go to the database. I'm just gonna copy and paste the values from here, and let's collapse them. So let's create the methods here. I'm just gonna paste them, and this is going to be place building. We're gonna send the client ID, device ID, and also we need to create an integer. Let's say this is going to be building ID. So as you know, we need to send the device as well, because that's for our authentication. So we probably shouldn't be sending this as an integer. We could send it as a packet. So yeah, let's actually do that. I'm just gonna cut this, and let's go to the packet, received packet. So let's make a contract with ourselves. The first element for our packet should always be an integer called ID. So we're gonna say packet dot read integer, and that's gonna be our packet ID, and we're gonna switch that packet ID. Let me copy this. So we need to remember this, and every time we send a packet from our client, it should have a first element of integer. So we're gonna switch that, and if the number is 3, we're gonna process it like the way we want. So let's go back to the client, and instead of sending like this, I'm just gonna say packet. So the first thing I write is going to be an integer, which is going to be this integer. We're gonna cast the request ID of build, which is number 3, and we're gonna also set the packet dot write. We're gonna say system info, attach the device unique identifier to this packet, and we simply just gonna send the packet. And also let's create another element to our packet. We're gonna just write prefab index, which is the index of the building we want to place. Now we're gonna go to our server, and here we know that after an ID we're getting in a string as well, and it's gonna be a device. We're gonna read them in the exact same order. So it's going to be an integer called building ID, and we simply just can process it calling the database place building. The first one is going to be client ID, the second one is going to be device, and the third one is going to be building ID. Now I'm just gonna go to the database, and here we're gonna say place building async. Well, actually, before we do everything, let me just clear the methods we created. So we're gonna write this later, but for now let's go back to the terminal. So this is good for now, but let's actually go back to the client. Here we shouldn't immediately check to place the building. First we need to place it on the grid so player could move it around, and when the player put it on the proper place and clicked the build button, then we need to send this packet. So we're just gonna create a public method for this. So this is going to be confirm build. So let's cut all of that and paste it here. So now here in the collect, whenever the player clicks a building in our shop, first we need to get a position. Let's say Vector 30 for now. Of course we need to get a proper value later, but for now let's just leave it like that, and we're gonna say building, and we're gonna instantiate something. So what we're gonna instantiate, it's going to be UI main.instance.buildings, building prefabs, and we're gonna pass the index of our prefab index, which we have here. Position would be this position that we've just assigned, but we're gonna change it later, and it's going to be quotidian.identity as the rotation. Here in the main we also need a reference to our grid, so we're just gonna say serialized field, and actually let's make it public, the build grid, and let's say grid. So that's going to be our grid. We're gonna assign that in the inspector. Let's actually do that. So this is going to be our UI main, so the grid is going to be in the map, and that's the grid. Here it is. And also let me just close this shop elements, and let me collapse these, and let's test this. So when I click shop and click gold mine, a building is going to be placed for me here. Of course, here as you can see, let me go to the script. Here in the UI building, as you can see, the position is Vector 30. We need to get the better position, and we're gonna snap this building to our grid, and we can then move it around and choose a better place for it and build it there. But for now this is good enough. Hopefully in the next video we can create an option to move around this building. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next videos.